Hi, everybody. Stefan Molyneux from Freedomain, back with a good friend from Hong Kong. How is it going out there near the epicenter of this outbreak?
Well, there's a lot of detail that I can go into, but I would just like to start off with some statistics, or rather estimates, by some leading medical professionals. So, a Hong Kong U professor has actually uh, estimated the overall death toll of this epidemic to be around 1.4 million people. There's also another statistic from another medical doctor that around 44,000 people could die from this in
And
Hong Kong.
that's in Hong Kong, and that's based on 7.4 million residents, a
Yes.
30% infection rate, and a 2% mortality rate of those who are infected. And that's assuming that it's at 2%. And there are indications, I've heard different numbers, which I won't go into here because the math is not, I haven't confirmed the math, but 2% is very much at the low end. And that is really quite a staggering number.
Yes. Actually, I would say that the 2% number is sort of taking into consideration of, I think, the suspected cases as well. So not only the cases that they have tested. So if you're looking at only the confirmed cases, so the cases where they actually used the automated test to confirm that the person has the virus in their bodies, then actually the death rate is significantly higher. So there's a lot of technicalities, as they say. Statistics is it could be just another form of lying. So yeah.
Well, it's because you've got the problem with statistics based upon what I would divide into the legitimate unknowns and the illegitimate unknowns. So the legitimate unknowns are, how many people don't go to hospital because they're afraid that they're going to spread the virus. Hospitals, of course, during a pandemic can become epicenters for the spread of a disease. How many people are just dying at home? How many people are dying in hospital but not being tested because they're saving the testing kits for those who are still alive? So there's legitimate unknowns that no, not even the best system in the world could puzzle through. And then, of course, there are the illegitimate unknowns, which is the suppression or distortion of the numbers for largely political or perhaps even economic purposes.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, I think both are definitely factors that we need to consider. So actually talking about sort of gaming the statistics, there is a new theory going around that if you look at the incremental increase in the number of infected for today, you will notice maybe a slight decrease in the rate. So I think some theories are saying that they are trying to sort of game the figures a little bit so that they can actually get some major cities such as Shenzhen or Guangzhou, both of which are close to Hong Kong, to actually resume work. Because what's been happening right now is the central government has lengthened the Chinese New Year holidays, and so that people don't have to go to work and the factories don't have to start up yet. But I think eventually they will need to, so they are sort of trying to restart these two. However, as far as I know, there are also some measures put into place to actually try and contain any possible spread, which is going to inevitably happen because work and workplaces entail more interactions between people. Yeah.
Well, and this is one of the things that troubles me with the people who you see all over the comments sections and all over Twitter saying, oh, it's just the virus. Sorry, it's just like the flu. It's just another flu. And it's like, if you look at the videos coming out of Wuhan with the sort of mass chemical disinfectant spraying, if you look at the number of sports stadiums and other arenas that have been converted into makeshift hospitals, if you look at the construction of multiple hospitals at an extraordinarily high pace, and if you look at the quarantine or sort of the limiting of movement of tens of millions of people, this is not just the flu. I mean, I don't remember, I'm no doctor, but I don't remember a flu ever being treated with AIDS-type medications in the past. So I just, I don't want to be fear-mongering guy, but I think a reasonable level of caution and not just saying, hey, it's like the flu, somewhere in between, I think is the best place.
Well, to begin with, I think the first time I actually encountered the U.S. flu theory that supposedly says that around 6,000 or 60,000 or some
It's
number
a
like
high
that.
number. I've seen a whole bunch, but it's a
Yeah.
pretty shocking statistic when you look at how many people die from the sort of regular old flu every year.
Yes. So I don't doubt that, but at the same time, the first time I actually encountered this was actually on WeChat. My instinct was, okay, maybe there's something going on here. So maybe they want to sort of comparatively downplay the current situation by sort of comparing it to the good old rival, the U.S. Yeah, so they want to make it so that China is actually somehow doing a lot better, and this epidemic is nothing to worry about. I I've seen a lot of these theories float around. A lot of these get forwarded back and forth on social media these days. I think now is just a key time to always, the moment you're on social media, I feel you just have to just turn on your critical thinking, and by default, every time you see a post, just uh, just don't assume it's true, because there's a lot of misinformation going on. There's this epidemic, I think, is uh, however serious it may be in terms of fatalities and infected, is much more serious in terms of the politicizing. So actually, I just read a story about the in Australia. I think there are some people who want to get the travel ban out of so basically the Australian government put a travel ban on Chinese tourists, and some people are voicing out against that. And when I looked into the article, actually uh, it actually was, I think, initiated by some international students from China. So that's basically got me thinking. Okay, maybe there is, a connection there. Maybe they are, well, as we know, I think, not as a matter of fact now, that there are, there are agents, and there are people who are paid to sort of play that propaganda game outside of China.
Have you heard anything about what I consider a kind of underreported and highly troubling piece of information, which is that a study some years ago had a coronavirus, not the 2019 nCoV, but had the coronavirus living on hard surfaces for up to 28 days under the right conditions? That is astonishing, because that, of course, is, hand on a piece of plastic shipped overseas, and somebody opens it and then touches their eye, and it's a conceivable, as far as I understand it, a conceivable transmission scenario. Given, of course, that China is a manufacturing hub. I mean, obviously less in the last
Oh yes.
few weeks or two, but that transmission scenario where it's on the goods that are moving. Do you know if any research has been done? I mean, it's so recent, it would be hard to even tell at the moment, on the longevity of 2019 nCoV on surfaces.
The numbers I have seen are around up to, I think, 240 hours. So that's around 10 days or so. That's a lot. Even if it's shorter than what you said. But I would say that does not really surprise me, because there was always this mystery as to how it spread. And initially, I think a lot of people were down this is actually an airborne virus, so it's fully airborne. That's different from an aerosol
It's when it can
transmission.
float in the air, it doesn't need to hang or piggyback on water droplets, right?
Yes, and that means that it will infect people who are much further away. I think an example of them would be like measles. That's highly contagious. I think the R naught is even higher than this nCoV. But as far as I can see, there is no evidence of airborne transmission. So for me, I think the contact theory really makes a lot of sense. it's actually always been in the back of my mind every day since this epidemic sort of became mainstream and we all started wearing masks. My theory is it's actually very hard to actually not to be fully aware of what you're touching all the time. I feel it's difficult because it's actually, well, for example, I touch a doorknob and then I will touch my keyboard, or maybe I'll open my MacBook before that. But I'm touching a lot of things, and in between them, I'm not really washing my hands. Now, if a virus is able to actually last this long on for example, I hear the metal surfaces is where they last especially long, then actually you could be spreading them everywhere, and it's just not practical to sanitize your hands every single time after touching a certain thing. So I would say that to me would explain a lot. I personally would attribute most of the infections, just based on personal experience, to human error. So I would basically ask, how often does this average person actually touch their face every day subconsciously? How feasible is it to sanitize each surface after every touch? It's not feasible. How often does each person actually catch the annual flu or other respiratory illness that can be contracted or transmitted through fomite contact? Is there actually enough supply of hand sanitizer, hygiene equipment, and gloves available for use? Will people actually go as far as to always wear gloves when they go out and they go shopping, or they go to the grocery store and they have to touch 1,000 different things, just subconsciously, out of habit? So I think it's this vector of transmission is all about the little details that we miss all the time, just naturally as human beings, as curious, but also we need to work, we need to function, and to function we need to use our hands all the time. So it's the devils are in the details, and it's in human error.
Well, and as
to
you
me, I think
pointed
that
out,
explains.
the hand washing tradition is not very strong in certain parts of China, maybe even the majority of China. I mean, you could make rinse, but soap is less common, and soap is kind of the key factor to get the oils off your skin, which the viruses are embedded in.
Oh, absolutely. Actually, speaking of hand washing, actually a lot of friends, especially male friends, that I know of, actually do not wash their hands properly still. They basically, what they do is they go to the bathroom, they maybe take a leak, and then when it comes to washing their hands, they will put their one hand under the tap for a few seconds, and then the other hand under the tap for a few seconds, and then put them together, and then turn off the tap, and then go and wipe it off. So people do not. I would say there's still a lot of people who do not come close to washing their hands for 20 seconds. There's still a lot of people who are, they don't follow the can I call it a procedure, or the
The
moves?
guidelines, yeah. Like you got to sing
Yeah.
Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star from beginning to end, or whatever the equivalent is in Mandarin or Cantonese. You got to sing a little song from beginning to end. And then you have to take the paper towel and you have to turn off the taps. And then what
Yes.
I do is I actually use my t-shirt or sweater to open the door to get out of the bathroom, because the number of people who've just wiped their butt, who've grabbed the handle with fecal matter on it and opened it. I mean, there's a whole thing. It's not just washing your hands. And this is something I've been doing for 30 years. It's one of the reasons I've only ever gotten the flu once in my life, shortly after I got a flu shot, ironically enough. But there's a lot that you need to do to keep stuff off your hands. I mean, even in normal circumstances now, of course, the requirement is crazy high.
Yes, absolutely. It's I would say it's asking for people to score above 99 when the mean is maybe, I'm not sure if it's even near 60, because there's still a lot of people who believe that washing their hands is just putting water on their hands and then wiping it off. So speaking of this, actually, I have sort of been cultivating this paranoid personality of mine, because I have a part of my personality that really likes to keep things clean. So it's very compulsive. It's very it's about, taking every precaution. If I let that personality take over, basically I will be pumping that alcohol dispenser every time I touch something.
Right.
So yeah, I have taken actually to wearing gloves out when I go out to a crowded area, or when I go to eat. The reason is because I found, at least it works for me, that when I'm wearing gloves, there's basically zero chance of me touching my face inadvertently, because I just really hate the feeling of gloves on my face. So that's so far been working very well, and I am looking to actually get to acquire more latex examination gloves for this use. Yes, so it's, however, they are starting to become sold out, and I think there's a shortage of not just masks, but gloves, detergents, disinfectants, bleach, and actually this week, in a few short hours after a rumor began to circulate about a particularly large tissue manufacturer, I think based near Hubei, where, well, basically they put out a statement saying that we were going to actually stop. Well, no, they didn't say stop, but they said our production lines are working well, and actually that provoked quite a lot of panic, because don't, as I think one saying goes, don't believe anything in politics until it is officially denied. So that came out, that jumped out at me, and the moment I saw that, I knew people were going to head out and actually empty the shelves for toilet tissue and other paper products, and I got myself some as well. So if hoarding is a sin or a crime, I'm definitely guilty of that too.
Let me ask you this as well, because there's interesting elements of this pandemic that have to do with both race and with class. So, as I pointed out in a presentation I put out yesterday, there is a specific danger for East Asians and for East Asian males, of course, in that they lack particular inhibitors that would reject the binding or the absorption of this virus into their lung tissue. Now, some people have said that that's not just an sort of an East Asian male thing. It's also because the smoking rate in China, this is unconfirmed, this is what people have reported to me, that the smoking rate in China is like 50% for men, but only 2% for women. And if you're a smoker, then you're more susceptible to this kind of virus. But you also pointed out something really fascinating to me and unexpected. Of course, it's the kind of thing you think about, it's like, oh yeah, it makes total sense, but I hadn't thought about it before, which is how class-specific, in a way, the virus is, insofar as, working from home for white-collar workers, for computer programmers, for project managers, for, salesmen and saleswomen on the phone all day. Well, you can work from home, but if you are putting widgets together in a factory, you can't. And this class divide as well is really quite fascinating, because the white-collar workers can continue, for the most part, to earn their income, but the blue-collar workers, the working class, so to speak, it's much more difficult.
Oh, absolutely. Actually, I haven't actually been out for a week, so you can say that I have, I think of myself actually like some of those nobles back in the Middle Ages when they had the Black Plague.
Oh, they just go to their
and
country
people,
estates. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. In a way, I sort of feel like that. Even though where I live is nothing like a country estate, but it's well, at least it's not in a crowded area. And I think people are relatively conscious of hygiene, and for example, nobody actually uses their fingers to press the lift or any button now. Everybody uses a pen or a toothpick. So yeah, sorry. So back to the race specific or the class specific topic. I I was aware of the trend that more men are currently being infected, and also that more men are dying of nCoV. I haven't seen the papers on the East Asian part yet, but I I definitely feel that there, when what yes, for a fact that's true, but what's interesting to me is how people are receiving this fact. When I tell this to male friends or male relatives, they sort of just shrug it off, and they don't really see that, oh, actually it's, you are, I think, according to some estimates, 75% more likely to die of this virus uh, than women are. But it's like people don't really get it, and they haven't really changed their lifestyle to to accommodate for this, radical new threat in their environment. So I would say that does bring me some distress, because I feel that knowledge is useless unless it's applied, and it mitigates your risk, or it improves your life. So I would be curious to talk about this part too. But yes, sorry.
What
You're saying.
There's something else that I find really quite fascinating. You really don't know the power of a government until it does something that's completely inexcusable. Because then what you find out is who's willing to criticize that government. Because for the Chinese government to sit on the knowledge of this virus for, I mean, it's even hard to know for how long they sat on this knowledge. A couple of weeks, month and a half. But that could have made all the difference in the world if they had acted decisively and proactively, rather than, in this case, acting in ways that could have directly or indirectly caused the deaths of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of people over time. That is one of the least excusable and most horrendous actions, I think, that governments have taken. They may win the prize for the 21st century, outside perhaps of the invasion of Iraq. But the degree to which the mainstream media is not going after the Chinese government in the most scathing and vociferous terms is really, I mean, they'll go after me. That's the funny thing about the mainstream media. Like, if you've been targeted by the mainstream media because I liked Poland, so suddenly I'm like an evil guy or something like that, like just crazy stuff that they make up. But then a government actually sits on the knowledge of a deadly virus, does not inform the world, does not act proactively to contain the threat, even though, as far as I understand it, the Chinese government's in charge of pretty much the entire healthcare system, and can't really complain about anyone but themselves since they are so authoritarian. Man, they are getting a lot of get-out-of-jail-free cards from the mainstream media and from governments around the world. This should just be, I mean, gosh, when... there's this fantasy that Russia meddled in the U.S. election in 2016, and you get years and years of attacks upon the Russians, and here you have an actual case where a government sat on the knowledge of a deadly virus and thus facilitating its spread to who knows how many people. We won't know for sure for years probably, if ever. And yet people are just talking about the virus without talking about the Chinese government. That, to me, I mean, I know from Hong Kong the view is a little more different because your relationship with the Chinese government is a little more critical. But it really, boy, it shows you the real power in the world when something like this happens. I'm on the front page of the New York Times as a bad guy, but you can't get the mainstream media to say boo to a mouse when it comes to criticizing the Chinese government regarding this monstrous dereliction of duty.
Well, yes, I think I can answer this in more than three ways, but
Please go
First of all,
illuminate me. I'd like to know.
well,
I'm trying to
first
avoid
of
the pit
all,
of hatred, so please lead me back from the
yes.
edge.
Well, first of all, I would really need to sort of be grateful for the fact that I've listened to you actually for I think more than 5 6 years or so. So I when this epidemics when I saw the government cover up and the epidemic start and people and all that reporting from semi-neutral sources such as the South China Morning Post, which is owned by Alibaba, which is now owned. Well, it's basically CCP at the end
Has he ever,
for
sorry
all
to
the
interrupt, has he ever resurfaced? Does anyone know where that guy is at the moment?
That's interesting because I think the last time I sort of saw him was actually last night on one of the WeChats. There's this show with him actually singing karaoke with a few other, I think, billionaires from China, and people were commenting, "Hey, actually, this Jack Ma actually sings pretty well."
Oh, good.
So,
Okay, so he's back in the limelight. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
so yeah, yeah. Sorry, where was I? Yes. So I would say that just coming from that central premise that government is fundamentally based off of coercion, and coercion naturally includes manipulation, does deception, and I would say this kind of psychological kind of things. So just coming from that premise, I think it really actually helped me actually uh, achieve clarity a bit faster. Actually, I was able to sort of see the this neutral sounding reporting that the SCMP was doing um, uh, uh, all of this time. Yeah. So for example, I think let's go to an example. There's this video of a police drone actually going after a elderly woman in China, telling her to put on her mask. And actually, this woman is actually basically chased by the drone back home because she doesn't have a mask on. So, and behind that, actually, there's a soundtrack that is really cheesy and it's really lighthearted. So I see what I see is basically the SCMP, the South China Morning Post, is trying to make this a lighthearted matter. They're trying to portray this as this is high tech, this is cool, this is futuristic, and but it's actually it's really 1984. It's way more than 1984 ever predicted. So it's I would say I'm really grateful for that clarity, and so that's my first perspective. Yeah. So I would say my second perspective is basically the government is extremely adept at dividing people. They're more adept than ever with the help of big data, data analytics, data science, all machine learning, all that kind of high technology and all the sensors that they have. Uh, they're more able to make decisions or uh, on how to actually manipulate people. So, for example, when they have a kind of news that they cannot actually control and actually leaked out, such as that of the dying and now deceased whistleblower doctor. Um, actually,
Is it
most of
confirmed? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I've heard mixed stories about his actual death. Some media outlets, I think Chinese media outlets, denying it. Is it confirmed? Do you know if it's certain now?
yes, as far as I know, it is confirmed.
Okay.
It's quite unanimous across the sources. So his died, and actually most of the news, I would say, mainstream news, but also alternative media, has sort of focused on how sad it was and how he should be remembered. Of course, there's also a lot of anger, uh, but I would say they actually sort of neglected to mention. Well, of course, I can't confirm this firsthand, but there are other sources that say that this dying doctor was practically killed through a neglect. So basically,
I've sorry to interrupt. I've heard this. It's a very, very bitter joke that this doctor died of 2 coronaviruses to the back of the head.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay, that's okay.
But sorry, you were
feel
saying that there was sort of maybe a benign neglect that let him pass?
Yes. Yes. So I would say, according to my source, he needed intubation. So basically, he needed intensive care because his lungs were starting to fail, and he actually needed artificial ventilation or mechanical ventilation. But actually, they didn't do that. So he was only given a higher flow of oxygen, and so naturally, that doesn't help. So his life is significantly shortened, and his ability to recover is basically eliminated. So, and actually, when he required resuscitation, reportedly they actually left him there for a few minutes before they started the CPR and the rescue procedures. So.
And sorry, this hostility or lack of care, if it's true, is the assumption that it was based upon the fact that he did break ranks and start talking about the dangers of this disease against the wishes of the CCP?
Yes. So the premise, or reportedly, the higher ups in the hospital that he worked absolutely did not like the fact that he blew the whistle, that he made them look bad. That he affected their chances of promotion, etc. And so they basically just left him there, and he, I think, was also assigned to more dangerous duties. So.
Well, I'm sorry. Let me just, before this thought vanishes, I really apologize for the interruption, but I just wanted to mention as well, with regards to the fatality rates of this disease, right now, because a lot of people, of course, in China still have access to high-quality health care, particularly breathing help, as you talk, the intubation or whatever it is that's needed to keep the lungs functioning when oxygen processing is diminishing. When that system gets overwhelmed, you can't just snap your fingers and make more. I know they're building new hospitals, but this is a lot of complicated equipment, and you need a lot of people trained in it and so on. But when people begin to overwhelm that system, I think the fatality rate is going to go up when they can't get access to these kinds of breathing aids in hospitals, or if it spreads, to other places. If it's not race-specific, it goes to Africa and so on. A lot of people won't have access to these breathing aids that are quite sophisticated, and I think then the mortality rate is going to go up considerably.
Absolutely. Actually, it goes back even before, in terms of the infection stages, it goes even before that. So when the patient has breathing difficulties and they need the supplemental oxygen, I mean, in many places they aren't even going to get that. So the lifespan and the death rate is much higher because of that.
And that's probably one of the reasons why the rural villages are building these walls and trying to keep people out, because they're a long way from that kind of help.
Oh, absolutely. And there's also the fact that most of these villages outside of the major cities are inhabited by senior citizens, older people. And the thing is, there aren't clear numbers on this yet, but there are several sources that indicate that the elderly are quite susceptible to this. So I think, given this, they know that if they let someone in, that could be the end of them. So it's really a life or death thing when they have those roadblocks.
It's a funny thing too, because I don't believe this as a factual series of events, but at a time when China is facing a very top-heavy population, because of the one-child policy and other things. I mean, Japan has not had a one-child policy, but Japan is facing the same issues with a very top-heavy, like an inverted pyramid demographic situation. At the same time as they're facing an excess of elderly, boy, don't you know, a virus gets out that takes out the elderly. Again, I'm not saying it's engineered or anything like that, but if you put this in a book, people would say, that's a little bit too convenient for like sociopathic policy.
Yes, yes, that same theory has floated around quite persistently. Personally, I feel that I would say that in general, I think the stereotypical disease or epidemic tends to kill the the less healthy or those with chronic disease or those who are physically weaker. And so I would say that whether or not it is a deliberate leak or an accidental leak or just a natural mutation or jumping of the virus from one animal to the other, the results are more or less the same. And I would say, like, given enough time, well, that's my theory, that given enough time, something like this is bound to happen. Okay, so that's kind of like Murphy's law, right? But yeah, so it's given enough time, something like that is going to happen, and when it happens, it doesn't really matter what the cause is anymore, but rather the effects. And so while I do have significant interest in trying to dig into the theories and find the truth, I also feel that the future is uncertain, but at the same time we can build that future. So in terms of priorities, I need to prioritize my time and thinking power.
We'll probably never know. I mean, I try not to chase these ghosts that you can't figure out. So I have two last questions, and I really, really appreciate your time today. The first is, so when people hear that the Chinese people are eating, leopards and bats and other koala bears and things, a lot of people are kind of shocked and appalled, and it seems like one of these cultural bridges that's too far for people to understand. And I remember actually back in my business days being taken out by a client who was very well heeled, so to speak, to a Chinese restaurant and eating sea slugs and snake soup and so on, and being like, wow, it's a long way from orange chicken. But so I sort of put forward the theory that one of the reasons that the Chinese eat stuff that is not traditionally eaten, at least in Western cultures, is because starvation over time, to certainly under the collectivization of the farms under Mao, they just had to eat anything that moves. But other people have sort of pushed back against that and said that it has a lot more to do with traditional Chinese medicines and the belief that certain animals possess strengthening or restorative powers. Do you have any insights or thoughts as to how these eating practices developed and how they're maintained?
Well, I would say I would start from the current epidemic. Actually, there is quite a plausible and actually, I would say, verifiable reason. And that is, if you remember earlier last year, there was a swine flu, and you had the pork prices skyrocket in China, and actually I think China also had to import pork as well. So the result of that was people went back to eating a lot more of other meats, because it's cheaper. So I would say there is a very pragmatic and I would say a market reason for the consumption of what the West would call exotic meats in this epidemic. But going back to your question, in terms of Chinese medicine, indeed there are such theories. I'm not a Chinese medical doctor or anything, but I have taken Chinese medicine. They do all sorts of different things. So, for example, actually cockroaches are supposed to be Chinese medicine too. The reasoning behind that is that cockroaches actually have extremely high, extremely high survivability, or they're very good at surviving. They can eat anything. They are everywhere. They breed quickly, and so if you eat that, you will become stronger. So there is like a lot of analogies there going on. I don't know exactly how they do it, but I feel that's a very persistent a belief, or actually theory, in Chinese medicine. The other part about a cuisine, I would say that Chinese people are very fond of variety. If you look at the way Chinese people eat, it's a very communal thing, or a very familial thing. So around the dining table, people share food. There are many dishes, and actually, the more dishes you have, I would say in general, the more well off you can say that your family is. And so there is a lot of emphasis on the variety, as well as the quality of food, as well as having tastes that are unique to the region, or exotic. Yeah. So when Chinese people go to another region in China, they want to try the tastes that can only be tasted there, and I think that's partly where the consumption of exotic animals comes from, because you can get pork and beef and chicken everywhere, but in terms of things like sea slugs or snakes, that's quite rare. And you have to add, on top of that, many types of cooking that you can use to process that food. Yeah. So
Right.
when you add that all up, I think it goes back to that variety theme. China, to be honest, it's the CCP would want you to believe that it is one country under their system. It's very clean and all, but if you look at history, it's actually a melting pot of many different minorities, different tribes, peoples from different regions who have adapted to different circumstances, different climates, different environments, and they often have wars, and when one side wins, they conquer the other. So the people living in the south will occasionally conquer the people in the north, and then and vice versa. So it's a constant melting pot, but every region has their culture, and so there's a lot of variety, and I think that's where this exotic animal or exotic theme comes from. Yeah.
The other question I have, which to me is central to the spread of this disease, it's kind of funny, when I was out in Hong Kong last year doing the documentary, I had a long speech out on the harbor about how in the 19th century it was a fear of losing face, a fear of bringing bad news to the emperor, so to speak, that had the local leaders in Hong Kong not relay to the emperor how powerful and dangerous the British Royal Navy was and how well it was doing. They were always downplaying the disaster and we've got it under control and everything's fine, until they went up and destroyed the emperor's winter palace and I guess and took all of his tax barges. And then at some point he had to say, well, it probably is worse than I think. Now, of course, this idea of saving face is very powerful, is very strong in East Asian culture. Not to sort of lump it all together, but help me understand. I mean, nobody wants to look bad. Of course, nobody wants to admit fault and make mistakes and so on. But considerations of human catastrophes like NCOV 2019 ideally, we understand, should override those concerns. What do you think it is in the Chinese culture, which I know has had a bit of a separation from the Hong Kong culture, but what do you think it is that it makes this sort of face-saving and shooting the messenger and not wanting to convey bad news. What do you think makes that? Because more than just, I mean, this was occurring long before communism, so it's not just communism, although I'm sure communism makes it worse. What is the basis of that in the culture, do you think?
I would say that, well, just describing the overall environment in which a phenomenon like this occurs, I would go back to childhood. I would go back to how each generation is raised. So basically, you have one generation and the next, and the parents parent the children, and then the children go on to parent their children. So there's a lot of commonalities that sort of will get passed down naturally, no matter what culture you are in. So I would say that sets the stage for actually this theory that well, can I go there? Well, so I would say that the family is actually it's part of a country. So if you look at Chinese, the word for country is 国家. So 国家is basically nation, family. The 家 is basically family. So it is very interrelated. So I think a particular philosopher or literati, if I can call them that, calls whoever wants to rule a nation must first sort out his own family. So the family, there is this notion that the family affects the nation, and ruling a nation is basically ruling a family. So when you see posts or news items that come out from the People's Daily, which is the Chinese Communist Party's official newspaper, People's Daily, when they say that we are one family, and we should not fight each other, and Hong Kong should make its peace with the mainland, that really actually resonates with people. So it's a very central belief, I think. That's the first thing, I think. Building on top of that, there's the notion that, well, actually, yeah, okay, I can use the word notion. There's a notion that the parent is the, it's above the children and will always be above the children. So they have power over the children, but more than that, they have basically supreme control. So there's, as you say, there is no greater imbalance of power than that of parent and child. So that's well recognized, but at the same time, that's recognized as an inevitable fact, and that's used as a justification for the centralization of power. So, viewing from this lens, the CCP views the people as its children and itself as a parent, and likewise, the people are taught that the CCP is your parent. You will always in order to exist, you have to have a parent, and therefore, according to their logic, if you exist as a human being, you need to be ruled by someone else, and you need to be, and that someone else, for example, the Communist Party, is responsible for everything. It has overall control over everything, and that's all justified according to this parent-child relationship. And
okay, so the child is raised as, in a sense, a slave to the preferences of the parent, and then, as a theory I've talked about for many years, that then gets transferred to the political realm, wherein to criticize the state is considered to be as immoral and ungrateful and unjust as it would be to criticize a parent. And so the state is profiting from the relationship established within the family, which has people very hesitant to criticize political power, just as they would be to criticize their parents.
Indeed, that is. There's a name for this concept called filial loyalty, I think, or is it fidelity or something?
No,
It's
filial
one, but
loyalty, yeah. Loyalty
yes.
up the genetic chain, and I guess also if you view the state as a family, up the political chain as well.
Yes, so the Chinese Communist Party, and I think virtually everyone who has ever taken power in China has used that, and so that is a central belief in Chinese culture, or at least traditionally speaking. So building on top of that, that means that it is your superiors always know best. If you're in the workplace and you have an employer-employee relationship, it means that your government knows best. If they hide the numbers, it is for your own good. It is for they say that it is for the stability of the nation, of this family. They say that it is basically the natural order of things, and if you go against that, you will face the sanctions by law. And so I would say that's part of it. But at the same time, I think if I link that to modern management theory, I think there is a concept that is maybe useful to the viewers, and that is psychological safety. So that actually rings quite true to my own life and work as well. So psychological safety, I would is basically defined as psychological safety is being able to show and employ oneself without fear of negative consequences of self-image, status, or career. It is a condition in which you feel included, safe to learn, safe to contribute, safe to challenge the status quo, all without the fear of being harassed, marginalized, or punished in any way. So I think, well, from this perspective, I see this the past situation in Wuhan, the healthcare workers being arrested for reporting the virus, and so that's totally predictable, given the low levels of psychological safety in those organizations. So I would say, on one hand, you have the individual level where the way they're raised, the very hierarchical parent always knows best mentality, and the parent is never wrong mentality. But also, when you put many people who believe that together, for example, a group of employees or a group of even Communist Party members in the committee, they will defer to the superior. There is very low transparency. They are afraid of conveying those what the actual real situation is, for fear of breaking this. They would even call that harmony, 和谐, in Chinese. So I've seen that happen, and to be honest, in my experience, that makes a whole world of difference in no matter what team you're in or what organization or industry. When people are not straightforward, the mistakes will roll and roll and roll, and they will accumulate, and until they go past a point of no return. And the way I see it now, actually, if I were to relate this back to the nCoV virus, I would say that we are. I'm not sure if we're there yet. I'm not a professional, obviously, but it's, to me, I'm when I prepare or when I research, I always have the mindset of considering the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario, I think, is that this becomes, can you call it an endemic? So it's here to stay. What that means is that a lot of people will continue to die of this. And another maybe related possibility is that it becomes somewhat seasonal, like the flu. So there's seasons. There's some times where there's large outbreaks, and sometimes where it's relatively quiet.
Well, especially because the mutation rate of the RNA strands seem to be very high, which is why you have to get a flu shot if you want it every year. So this mutation, I mean, you never know. Maybe it could become fully airborne. Maybe it could become even more virulent. Maybe it could become less virulent and lose its ability to hang on water droplets. Who knows? But I guess less virulent is usually not common, because more virulent means more spread. So that is a big risk that we're going to have a permanent fixture in the human landscape now.
Yes. This is, I think, a real possibility that the medical community is sort of discussing or speculating.
Right. Well, listen, I think we should close it here. We've had a nice, long, juicy show, and I really, really do appreciate you taking the time, especially given our disparate time zones. I really, really do appreciate you taking the time, and thank you so much for the information you're passing along to me. Please keep me updated. I will do what I can to get the word out. I really appreciate your time today, as I said, and I hope that you stay safe. I hope you get to see daylight soon, and appreciate your time today.
Sure. Thank you for your time as well. Yeah, your time is very precious. I understand you have a very long queue of people who are waiting to talk to you. So thank you very much for your time as well.
Take care.